Hi, I'm Manuente Reme, Icheb from Star Trek Voyager and the executive producer of the Circuit Urbiesa, and you're listening to Kneel Before Pod.
Kneel Before Blog presents Kneel Before Pod.
Hello and welcome to another web-slinging edition of Kneel Before Pod. I'm your host Craig and this is a very special episode for me. The animated series Spectacular Spider-Man is my favourite version of the character outside of the comics, and I've been looking to put together a podcast about this show for a while, so I can articulate how much I love it. Now my dream has come true and we're doing an episode about it. So here for a further dose of Spider-Man chat is Aaron.
Hola.
Hello, how is it going?
It goes well. How is it going with you?
It is going well. I'm all psyched to talk some more Spider-Man. About a week after was it 2 weeks after the film came out? I think it's 2 weeks.
I lose track of time, actually. I'll believe whatever you say.
Yeah, it's some time after the film came out. Although people could be listening to this in the year 3000, so it's been quite some time.
I feel our content will be somewhat dated and only listened to by historians in that case, so I wouldn't worry about it.
I would take historians, be like, this is an example of a podcast from the 21st century. Let's listen to it. Whatever. But yeah, Spectacular Spider-Man was a cartoon that aired in 2008 through 2009, and it was it's yet another Spider-Man reboot, I suppose. In animated form. It was meant to cater to a new generation of Spider fans, and it aired on the Kids WB, according to Wikipedia.
That ain't where I saw it.
No, it's not where I saw it either. I'm not going to say where I saw it for legal reasons.
Indeed.
But yeah, it ran for 2 years. Kids cartoon, and what are your thoughts on this kids cartoon? I mean, I don't know why I'm emphasising that, but...
Well, I wonder actually as well, when you say that, what the age group was. I can't decide whether is it sort of early teens actually rather than kids, maybe.
It's a Saturday morning cartoon, so...
So it is going to be kids then, yeah.
Aimed at young kids, for sure, yeah.
Either way, it is probably something I enjoyed more than the Spider-Man I watched as a kid, actually. Although that could just be memory issues, because I do remember saying on the last Spider-Man podcast that I don't remember it too well, although I'm more of a memory of Iceman and Firestar than I do of that.
Spider-Man and his amazing friends.
Absolutely, that was great. Enjoyed that as a kid. Can't remember much of it, but definitely remember enjoying it. One of the noticeable things, though, about Spectacular Spider-Man is that even though it's a kids' show, I've taken quite a lot of notes here where I thought that its plotting and execution was far superior than a lot of adult shows I'm watching at the moment. I think that might be in the writing or art direction of it, and I don't really understand why more effort would go into little 20-minute things for kids than seems to go into an adult show, because it's not like they're less complicated. They are complicated still, but full marks for that. It's very well done.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that I said something similar after the first of the Michael Bay produced Ninja Turtles reboots came out. You know, it's almost like everyone involved was thinking it's just for kids, we don't have to try. But you know, if you're making something for kids, I mean, as adults we can watch something that kind of sucks and we can deal with it. And you know, but with kids, you're kind of making some kind of formative experience for them. So treating them like idiots isn't a good idea, I don't think. I think it's a bit of encouragement to put some effort in. If you're making something, then you might as well put some effort in. And the people involved in this show certainly did. It feels like it's written for fans of Spider-Man rather than kids cartoon, normal kids cartoon viewers, sort of. So I don't know what age group they're aiming at, but it's clear that the writing staff were passionate enough about the source material to create something that, is a good jumping on point for the character and is also intelligently written. So, kids could watch it, young kids could watch it it's a colourful guy fighting colourful villains every week, and there's quips and there's jokes and everything's all bright and fast moving. But when you get that bit older, or when you're, say, adult age, you can watch it and you can see character development, and you can see sophisticated story going through it, and it's all very simple, but simple doesn't mean bad, because you can make something that just works. Everything ties together nicely, everything just works in it, and I was really impressed. I think it's my favourite version of Spider-Man outside of the comics, and that includes Tom Holland.
Jolly good. I don't know the comics, so I don't have that real connection, but I did. If I had to choose one to watch out of the cartoons and any of the films, then I would actually come back to this as a definitive version that gets everything in, as you say, from Spider-Man. They don't miss a beat on any of the Spider-Man lore, I don't think, and manage to capture some of the most important parts of who we've come to know Peter Parker is right from the first episode.
Yeah, and it's also nicely updated as well. It's not just. We talked about diversity in the last Spider-Man podcast, but it's not just a bunch of white kids sitting around. Stan Lee always talked about how when he wrote Spider-Man in the 60s, he said that he was writing what he knew. He was writing the high schools that he knew about, and and the people that he would meet. But New York and the world has changed a lot since then, and he was always keen for it to be updated. So it's good that characters switch ethnicities and things like that, and it doesn't make any difference whatsoever to who they are or what their function is within this show as well.
No, I think it's a tricky one though, because I've been thinking about this ever since Homecoming, and I think I'm still on board with the people that say, yes, it definitely we want to update these things and make them more realistic, but I think what I was struggling with Homecoming was they specifically pushed it as being diverse, and therefore they came into a problem. Spectacular Spider-Man's, I don't know what was said about it. I'd be interested to hear what was actually said at the time, but I've not seen anybody pushing it and saying it's diverse. At the moment, to me, it just is a bit more diverse. Peter Parker happens to still be a white guy. The main villain, or turns out to be the main villain, is still a white guy, but no emphasis seems to have been placed on pushing it as a diverse content, and therefore it seems to settle more easily into just fitting into an updated slot, and I prefer that, and I think actually Homecoming might have suffered too much for the producer's excitement on that front.
Yeah, although there aren't as many ethnic switches in this one. There's essentially Liz, I think, is about the only one. There are diverse people kicking around. So what you've got is like Lizzie's brother, who turns out to be the Molten Man. He's obviously her brother, so he's the same race. But you've got an emphasis on like Joe Robertson's son, who wasn't at high school with him in the comics and things like that. But I don't know if they were marketing it as such. They marketed it as just a Spider-Man cartoon, as far as I can remember. But you also had the people commented on the fact that they changed a few things, and I think for kids as well, it just shows them that ethnic diversity is a normal thing. And it's just kind of, with it just being there, it can be watched, and then it's just something that they would grow up thinking was normal. Assuming this. Well, yeah. This show makes an impression on people.
Yeah, I think that makes it more normal, more acceptable. It also means you're not challenging anything when you're watching it, which ruins viewing. I think if you tried to watch it with a diversity pair of glasses on, you'd quickly start seeing how many of the villains are all white guys, and it would still come out as not that diverse in the grand scheme of things. Yeah. But they haven't pushed it hard. They have tried to make Peter's basic life more normal and therefore acceptable to the watching audience, so they don't challenge it, and without that big glowing claim on the front, it feels like they've gone in the right direction, and happy with that.
Yeah. Before we continue on with it to get into more depth, you think we should fire some kind of spoiler web shooter or something? Because I mean, I know it's almost 10 years old now. Jeez, that's insane. But people might be listening who haven't seen it and don't want it spoiled.
Somebody might choose to go back and watch it. That's possible. I mean, there's other things we could probably say without spoiling it. But if you really want to get into the meat and drink, then you might have to shoot your web, as it were.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's just get into the spoiler section now. Right, okay, now we can say whatever we want. So, I mean, did you have anything else on the kind of general background of the show before we kind of dig in?
The speed of it I found very interesting, and I comment on that because I've gone back and watched some of the cartoons I used to watch as a kid over the years, just out of curiosity. A noticeable favourite of mine was the old Transformers cartoons. And when I watch those, the speed is ridiculously fast. It is aimed at someone's brain who is working twice as fast as mine does now. And I used to be, that speed. And noticeable about this Spectacular Spider-Man, though, was it still moves really quickly to make sure it's targeted correctly for the younger audience with the quicker brains. But oddly, I found that it wasn't too fast for an adult. And that surprised me. I was expecting to watch this and go, oh, plot point, plot point, plot point. Not that I can't keep up, but just that it was going too fast for me to think I was getting any individual enjoyment out of any individual point because it wasn't emotional enough. But the speed that they go at is still introducing the plot point so you don't get bored, but stays long enough on any individual emotional point that even an adult, I think, can get something out of it. And I'm quite stunned by that because I'd like to think they did that on purpose. And if they did, I'd have to say that's one of the best things about the show.
Yeah, it does move quickly because they're telling a story that could be told in, if you imagine it as a 42-minute Flash-style TV series, for instance, or any of the modern superhero stuff, it would be a 42-minute thing, and then you could sort of see where they would maybe expand on certain things, and you'd probably be sitting there bored, sitting through, Peter explaining his absences for the millionth time. But the way they structure it in such a way that you kind of get the main thrust of what it's supposed to be about, and you get a little bit of depth because at the end of the day it's a Spider-Man show, and Spider-Man is always more about what Peter Parker's going through, what consequences come from the actions he takes. So, he runs away to save someone's life as Spider-Man, and someone's annoyed at him for not being there or not being or breaking a promise or whatever. And that's kind of, so it's important that you have that established world. So it's kind of, I actually care about the fact that Gwen is annoyed that he's not there, rather than, he's just gone again.
Well, I think they do well at all levels there, and definitely I agree with those points. But I'm thinking of the overall arcing of how they introduce plot lines. I think is it in the first couple of episodes there are 3 villains on screen at once. And there's actually 2 more in introduction if you count Dr. Connors and Eddie Brock as being introduced because they're going to have a plot based around them. That's 5 people at once. Yeah. Now, I railed at the Tobey Maguire's third film, which I now can't name Spider-Man or anything. 3. You can Spider-Man 3. Is that all it is? Dull.
Yeah, that's
right.
What it's called.
I railed at that film for having 3 villains because it just made the plot messy, jumping backwards and forwards, no consequence in any of them. It was just terrible. And here, they've managed to get 5 characters on screen at once in 20 minutes. And it doesn't feel bad. And I'm just, again, stunned at how good that is, especially when you think that the plots lead into each other. Because I was watching, so the first few episodes, you get episode 2, Electro appears, and at the end of that episode, his power alters the injection that Dr. Connors is going to take and make him into the lizard in episode 3, which then also sets up the cure possibility that Peter Parker ums and ahs over in 2 or further episodes later down in the series. And again, all of this is done in 20 minutes, each episode, without it feeling overwhelmed. It just makes you think that anybody who's out there trying to create adult TV or film should go back and watch this stuff and see how basic plotting is done and take note.
Yeah, narrative economy, it's brilliant, yeah. Because the first episode, you've got the Enforcers, the Vulture, you've got Eddie Brock, as you said, Doc Connors is there, and Norman Osborn is also there. So, yeah, they're doing a lot. They're juggling a lot of balls, and it's, they've just started, and it's really impressive. And you kind of, obviously, you get a sense that, Osborn, right, he'll be important later on, and obviously anybody that's seen the Raimi films even will know where Norman Osborn's going, or think they know where Norman Osborn's going.
Well, you know which kind of direction, how far involved he's going to be in, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then you've got the Vulture, and you find out enough about him. He was a business rival to Osborn, and it's bad that Osborn stole all his ideas or whatever, and that's enough of an origin story for him to just carry the episode. And then the Enforcers are just hired goons, and again, that's enough. But Homecoming has actually 4 villains in it as well, but Toombs is only the main one. So you've got 2 versions of the Shocker and the Tinkerer, who's just there tinkering. But
if you add on top of that the non-verbal sort of Easter egg setups as well, then you get this extra layer, and the foreshadowing that they do is, again, I'm going to keep coming back to it. It's so much better than a lot of other shows that you would think people are putting more effort into because the adult mind demands it more. But little bits throughout, like you see Black Cat in the Halloween episode, doesn't say anything, is never part of the main plot, but is doing something relevant to her character. She's out there in costume, in full view of everybody, because she can, because it's Halloween, clearly doing what she does, robbing people. And it's just this little moment that goes by that if you can look back on, you can connect to. And that's in all of it. The few of the other ones that I noticed them doing quite well is even with the emotional plotting. There's times when both Liz and Gwen get facial expressions in reaction to something Peter's done, or in response to something they've done. And the camera stays with them for not too long. It's not too po-faced. It's just a second or two to show you an emotional reaction, and then it moves on, and you take something from that. And I think in a lot of adult shows, another character would have turned up and said, "Liz, you're looking unhappy. Why is that?" And we'd have to have it explained.
Yeah.
Whereas we've got people watching this who would go, "Liz looks unhappy because of the event that just occurred. I'm a human being. I understand emotion. I don't need that explained to me." And they reckon kids can get this, but for some reason as adults, we need it all put down in exposition.
Yeah.
So, again, thumbs up to the show for these tiny little bits of detail that are just placed throughout.
Yeah. And I think we should talk a bit about the first episode, actually, because it's, it sets everything up. And now I'm thinking about everything they established. So you get the hint of the big man in that episode as well. It's just, I'm sure it's just a voice on a phone. Or is that happening?
Yes.
Later? But there's that hint. And then you've also got the establishing of Sandman and Rhino. They don't have their powers, obviously, but they're just people. They're just criminals that Spider-Man's been catching all summer. And that's reason enough for them to hate him. They're not big-time criminals. They just don't like him. And
yes.
it's good that, you know, it gives them a pre-existing relationship without doing that much work, really. Just, yeah, he keeps catching them, they're annoyed, therefore once they have the ability to get back at him, that's their motivation. And they like to steal stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, and more setting up for the future. There's a key point about the first episode, though, that I think stands out even more than that, which is the fact that it only alludes to the origin story and doesn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, as you're watching, if you had a drinking game or a checklist, you would still get drunk or complete your sets, because they do actually go through them all. They'd get in the great power line. They do get the spider bite. It does mention his uncle's dead, and or at least his uncle's not there anymore. There's something in it. And there's the humour, there's the jokes. And without doing an origin story, they've still set up Peter so you know who he is, and Spider-Man who he knows who he is, in a way that never held back the story. It was done with a classic narration. So you have to like that. You have to like the fact that he's talking to himself. If you don't like that, you're not going to like any of it. But then, arguably, you wouldn't like any Spider-Man at all. So I think tough.
He talks to himself a lot. Yeah.
But if that is sitting well with you, then I think you get the full setup without the drag of the origin story. And again, at that good speed. It's a good first episode. Very few shows have a good first episode. I think it's the most difficult thing to do ever, because you'll hear so many people say to you, oh, I like this show, but you've got to give it 4 episodes for it to find its feet, or get through series 1 and then it's excellent. And my argument to that is always, no, I don't. I don't have to do homework to watch a show. Yeah. If I don't like it, I'm not going to watch it. So this does fulfill that need for me. It opens with an excellent first episode.
And a good part of that is it's starting essentially in the middle. So, you know, the first shot of the first episode is him swinging through the city. It's like, okay, we're in full Spider-Man mode. He has the setup. He has his costume. He's swinging about. He's stopping crimes. He's quipping. You know, that's everything the character is. And when it comes to the origin stuff, it's alluded to but covered later. The 90s show did that as well. The first episode was just, you know, it was Night of the Lizard, it was called. And it was, again, the full setup was there and you were expected just to run with it. And people will run with it, I think, especially with Spider-Man, because he's so commonly known. Same with Superman, you know, you could start a Superman cartoon without blowing up Krypton and people would get it. People would be okay.
Well, they would, but the interesting thing about it is that the show does do setup, because all of those lines, as I say, they're all in there. You can tick them off, great power and so on. The key point, though, is the first episode sets up the foreground of what he's doing, as you say, fighting the villains, and who he is. So he is this guy who feels the need, obviously, to save the day, but also is doing it with his quips and his jokes, so that goes to his personality. So they set Peter up.
Yeah.
What they do, though, as you say, by starting in the middle, they've moved it on a bit. They don't feel the need to bog you down in rules, and they don't even have to move him on to an experienced Spider-Man to do it. They can set up the teenager that already exists, because it's very noticeable in the first episode or 2, he gets taken down by the enforcers. He's actually not good enough in a fight yet to beat them, so he's got that to learn.
Yeah.
And I think he's emotionally not quite adjusted to his full power set yet, because he thinks he can date a cheerleader, and he's got that to learn. So they do set up an established character, but still manage to get it very much as the beginning of a story for that character, which is, again, a balance that it must be very difficult to put down, but excellently done.
Yeah, and it tells you a lot about him, as you said, just early on. I mean, it's clear that he's a teenager who's had a summer of not seeing anyone else of his own age, so he's kind of built up this he's built this hype around himself. Now that he's got these powers, he feels more confident, and he thinks that everything's going to be different at high school. So he's talking about how he's going to be top of the social ladder and everything like that, and so he's having this great first night or last night before school starts, and then immediately gets to school and nothing has changed for him. Everyone popular still dismisses him, and he's still regarded as a bit of a loser. And I liked that because it's that kind of teenage naivety. He's believed his own hype and he has no reason to, but it's a very teenage thing to do.
Yeah, and it sets up his problems for the rest of possibly both seasons, actually, because he never really moves past that. He's always got that to deal with, because even when he gets into the popular crowd, arguably through Liz, he's never really fully accepted. So that's the foundation for both seasons' plot, school plot.
Yeah, and I like that he has the two friends in Gwen and Harry as well, because they play up the loner aspect in the comics, and you can still have that. I mean, he's just, he has his own little clique at school, but he's still not popular. Harry's kind of a dork as well, and Gwen is, she looks stereotypically nerdy, and they even do the thing later in the series where she suddenly takes her glasses off and she's amazingly hot according to everyone else around her, kind of thing.
Yes.
Which is, I don't know, I'll let them have a pass on it, because they at least they built the character before they did that. It wasn't just 3 episodes in they decided Gwen's going to be hot now, but and you'll never get to.
No, they established her defining feature as her intelligence.
Yeah.
From the start, and you get a long way into it before anything else is added on that would be too stereotypical for a romantic plot. Yeah. And
it's a very lived-in friendship as well. Harry's been away with his father all summer and has hated it, so he's just happy to see his friend again. And I don't think there's a reason given why Gwen doesn't see Peter for an entire 3 months or 8 weeks or however long summer holidays last in the US. He just hasn't seen her for some reason.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't falter for that. But no.
Yeah, it's and Harry's the one to immediately make fun of him for asking out a cheerleader and all this stuff. And it's nicely built up very quickly. You get a sense of what the hierarchy is at school very quickly. Peter's on the wrong end of it. As of course he will be, even though he feels like he should be more, but he gets kind of knocked down a peg almost immediately.
Yes. There's one scene in the first Tobey Maguire movie that I think was truly excellent when it came to establishing that connection between Peter and the bullies, that I don't think will actually be surpassed. But that said, the consistency of what they do in Spectacular Spider-Man is much higher, if only because it lasts longer. They can really give you a proper school time frame where he goes through several iterations of a connection with people in his class. He can develop that on, and he's always still at school. There's never any point where they're suddenly graduating, and you think, all right, all the school stuff's done then, so we haven't had time to go into it. But that's probably just the benefit it gets through being longer running than the film could possibly have been.
Yeah, the first Tobey Maguire film has 15 minutes of school scenes, if that. I mean, it's probably much less than that, actually. But what was the scene you were referring to that establishes that?
Is
it the trip up?
The point... Sorry?
Is it the bit where he's tripped up, or is it later than that?
Potentially, I don't quite remember that. It's the scene where they're in the locker room and he first gets his spider sense, and he detects that, I assume it's Flash, I can't remember now, but the Flash equivalent, even if it's not, comes up behind him with a punch, and he dodges, and Flash hits the lockers. And then he uses his powers almost quite by instinct to dodge Flash's attacks, and actually hits him. And of course Flash goes flying backwards because he's just been hit by Spider-Man. And in theory, the alpha male principal would say, you've conquered the current pack leader, you are now the pack leader. But the nature of the pack rules in school is never like that. No matter what you do, you're not going to be accepted unless you do it by the one method of, you know, of confidence and being who you are and establishing that. If you try and go any other route, in this case defeating Flash, you still get ridiculed and you still get bullied because they turn around to him and say, God, you are a freak, Peter, you know.
Yeah.
So even though he's kind of tried to step up and play them at their own game in this sense, they still won't accept him. And I think that's such a good portrayal of that particular connection between, you know, the nerd and the popular kids.
Yeah.
And I know they did do the bit where he gets rejected by the cheerleader in Spectacular, and it does work, you know. But that one moment in that film was so powerful for me of what it meant to be Peter that I've not forgotten it, and I don't think anything has quite surpassed it yet.
Mm-hmm. Plus, I think that in Spectacular, certainly the level of bullying seems quite tame by comparison. No one's beating him up really. They're just playing pranks on him all the time, and Flash just makes fun of him, and you know. But they don't seem to be disheartened by having him around. You know, when he's around, they're okay with it. And I wonder if that's a conscious thing to kind of, we can't show the bullying to be too brutal because young kids will be watching. You know,
it probably is, but although it opens up questions, I'll say from experience, most bullying I don't think was or is or will be physical.
Yeah.
So I think that occurred in that TV show was realistic enough, and it probably wasn't as nasty, and therefore that's what they had to tone it down to make it acceptable to kids, because you don't want to watch something too brutal. But in terms of the fact it was all pranks and jokes, I think that's quite realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, and it means that you can have meaningful interactions with them as well without it descending into, you know, just constantly being hassled. You know, there's episodes where he has to go to events with them and things like that. And you even get that moment when Aunt May's in the hospital where Flash cuts the crap for a minute and kind of calls him out on the way he's acting, but he's the voice of reason in that scene. But there's all little bits like that, and even in Flash's social circle, there are people that don't mind him, like Rand Robertson doesn't really care. You know, he doesn't care enough to make fun of him or anything like that.
Seeing on that point, actually, that got one of my notes has just jumped to my attention because of what you said. Flash having a moment as a proper human being and standing up for the right thing shows that none of the characters are truly abused in that sense, that they have nothing to do or they're one-dimensional. I mean, they're always tertiary characters, fine, but the secondary characters, I think they are all developed, and it's quite noticeable that quite a lot of people are not unused or just pointed to be a butt of a joke. Because there's a few of the side characters, like the evil chauffeur that takes Hammerhead around. In the early episodes, she is just a chauffeur, but later on, she's actually shown to be pretty good in a fight, be that a fist fight or with a gun. You know, she is overpowered by a top-class supervillain, but generally speaking, can hold her own against, you know, most of the people that are there. And the police aren't just brought in to be useless in the face of Spider-Man. They can actually arrest people. They are doing a lot of cleanup. To be fair, they're actually getting a lot of ladders and getting a lot of villains down from lampposts. That is probably their first job in the city. But if you listen to some of them talk, they do get to talk on the subject matter. There's a couple of times where they say whether they think Spider-Man is or is not a vigilante. And they never say anything stupid, I think, is the good thing. So they're human beings, and they're all worthwhile being there. And it's actually a good stereotype to break, where anybody on the right side who's not the hero is automatically useless to point out how good the hero is. The hero is just good, and they don't need to be used as a relative mark. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and there's a couple of cops, I don't think they're named, but they're there all the time.
Yes.
Whenever the police cars turn up, they spill out of them. But you've got Captain Stacy, who kind of represents the police. Obviously, he's Gwen's dad as well. And, just like in the comics, he's shown to be a fair-minded man who's, he sees the situation as it really is.
Yes.
So, when Spider-Man's accused of being a criminal, he sees the imposter because the imposter's too tall or doesn't behave like he does. And, and it was exactly like that in the comics. It's like, this isn't consistent with Spider-Man's behaviour at all. We should look into this further. And, the contrast to that is Jameson, like, brilliant, he's a criminal, I'm going to jump on this, I'm going to ruin him. And he has to write more retractions than factual stories. But in the comics, anyway, he writes a retraction like once, I think, in this show. But Stacy's a very good character in that sense. He's just he's very competent, of course, but he's really intelligent. He's able to assess a situation. You can look at him, and he doesn't get much in the way of characterization other than the scenes he appears in. But you get to see why. Yeah, this is why he's in that position. That's why he got there.
Yes,
because he's clever and fair, and believes in the law and all that stuff.
They develop him more towards the later episodes, though, don't they, in season 2, where he actually comes into the school to give them the talks,
and then he's on, he knows who Peter is and all that stuff,
and blatantly does know. I mean, you get the feeling that if they had have got a season 3, that character would have then stepped up and been much more involved. So he didn't get much early on, but he did pick up,
especially when they were starting the Peter-Gwen relationship at the end of season 2.
Well, that's what I mean. You can easily see how in season 3, based on that, he would, he'd be much more important.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And the city is, I mean, it's quite small in the sense that there's only a handful of people that can gain prominence, but there is quite a large supporting cast. There's a lot of people that come in and out, and they never switch out a character they've used for random at any point, so you kind of get some development of these people as the episodes go on, because they just show up again and they have more to do, which is good. I like a little lived-in world like that. It kind of rewards your loyalty to the show by seeing all these people kind of move on a little bit.
And it adds to that believability foundation as well, because like I was saying before with the foreshadowing, the other examples include those characters. The mayor, I believe, is introduced through a photograph on Jameson's desk before you have any idea who she is. Yeah. And the show doesn't make a big deal of it by saying, have you seen who I had lunch with the other day? You feel like that exposition would have had to have been there, whereas it doesn't. It's just, there is a famous woman that Jameson knows. Oh, look, in a later episode it turns out to be the mayor. And that photograph is exactly where it would have been in a previous episode without needing to mention it. Yeah. It's just in the right place.
Yeah, and I love Jameson in the show as well. He's so well done. The voice actor is excellent.
Yes.
And I like the way he'll say, I'm going to explain in 13 words or whatever, and then it's exactly 13, and Peter's just like, how did you know? But
yes.
It's just very sharp, very quick, and but even then there's that bit of depth. They ape the first Spider-Man film where he's asked where Peter Parker is, and he says he's never met him, and his stuff comes in the mail.
Yes.
Things like that. And when he does have to print a retraction, he does, but on page 42 in 12-point font or something like that.
I wondered that must be actually some sort of foundation in the comics without having seen it, because it was the one thing I noticed that was done quite heavily in Tom Holland film was the honour of all of the characters. They were behaving right by whatever means they saw or whatever foundation principles they held. And this here in Spectaculars, Jameson will not give up somebody who works for him, even in a life or death situation. So it does seem to be important to the Spider-Man principle. Pleased to see it again.
It's quite common in the comics where it would appear that Jameson's completely unreasonable, and then he'd go say something that's actually kind of reasonable.
Yeah.
But his vendetta against Spider-Man gets stupid after a while, and it's quite clear that he doesn't like Spider-Man for some reason in the show, but it never really goes into why, and his life isn't consumed by it either.
Well, it's only a short set scenes that he's in there, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think to establish a true hatred that is all-consuming and obsessional, then Jameson would need to be on screen more and have to be involved in the plots more, whereas here it's a character that makes him look stupid in the way that Jameson goes too far into a plot line because it'll sell papers, and then something is pointed out that, well, you probably shouldn't have gone that far because that's not who Spider-Man really is. You've sold a few papers here, but, that's not the truth. And so Jameson himself looks like he's done the wrong thing, and his ego won't stand for that.
Yeah.
And that is why he doesn't like the vigilante in this. It's not obsessional because it's almost just a work conflict. So I think it was all they could possibly establish for the character was there, and any more than that would have seemed a bit weird, I think, actually, if he suddenly became that obsessional.
Yeah. I mean, the Daily Bugle essentially exists to justify how Peter Parker makes money. That was its basic function in the comics, and they had to flesh out people that were in there because he was there a lot. He was handing in photographs, so you needed to have people he would talk to, and so I think, you get enough of Jameson to get a few laughs out of him, a little bit of depth here and there, but all in all, he's a bit of comic relief throughout.
Oh, he is.
That's mainly his main function, and then, but you've got other parts of the Daily Bugle that are quite important as well. So there's there's Foswell, aka Patch, so
yes.
he's kind of into the criminal underworld through his alias, and which is quite cool. Again, that's a riff on the comics. In the comics, he was a villain. Well, he wasn't a villain, but he was a criminal, and then Jameson hires him because he has those connections and so on. So it seems like they've skipped the he's a criminal part, or at least maybe that happened earlier. And now he's just a reporter with an alias, which, works. Yeah. It's fine.
Yeah, it works. Yeah, I have no problem with that at all, no.
Yeah. And you have Betty Brant as well, who's essentially his first love interest in the show, and the fact that she's 20 years old in the show, I think, which similar to the comics, and she quite likes him, and he's quite persistent, and she almost gets caught up in that, but eventually realises, this is a bit weird.
They do that well with the story, I think, although I did struggle to see the age difference in the drawing.
Yeah. So
it's good that they establish their ages so exactly, because I think I needed to see that, and I'm not sure if that's a failing of the cartoon or whether it's just impossible with that sort of art style. Yeah. Because they didn't look to look at them drawn next to each other. I didn't feel, oh God, she's way too old for him.
Yeah.
But when you hear the numbers and when you hear them speak, and he's a bit more awkward and she's a bit more confident, they establish it well there.
Yeah.
Because it should have been a bit eeky, actually, that he was so young compared to what she was. But you could believe that she could like his humour, and she could be just carried away slightly and being persuaded. You could sort of see that happening.
Or doesn't want to break his confidence by rejecting him at such a young age and whatever else. But I'm sure in the comics she's only about 18 when she's introduced. The idea is she left school early and got a job or something like that. But again, it's the 60s. But yeah. And I like how it played into the high school bit as well, where it's things, he's looking for a date to the dance, and he's telling Flash, I've got a girl coming with me, she's 20 years old and hot, and It just sounds so ludicrous, and everyone makes fun of him for it. But, I think everybody's known that kid at school who's, who has a girlfriend that's at a different school, or that he met on holiday, or something like that. And, and it taps into that. I mean, it is actually true, but it sounds ridiculous when from the other side.
As it should, yes.
Yeah. And then it turns out that he brings MJ instead, which is different. Well, it's different to what was expected, but, you know, he still wins that bet that they make.
He does. I think there's very few things that I didn't like about this show, and even this, I'm not going to say I didn't like it, but it's still quite noticeable. There are far too many incredibly hot female characters interested in Peter in such a short space of time for it to be quite believable. It sort of doesn't matter because it's 26 episodes, and therefore you can imagine it would take you half a year if you were watching them once a week as a kid.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't feel like it was all coming at you so quickly. But if you binge watch the whole thing, as I have done at least once, then you suddenly realise there's just these women just coming through the revolving door at him, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a bit too good.
Yeah,
but
the timeline of the 2 seasons takes place over about 6 months.
Yeah, that's too short a time for one nerdy guy to have 4 incredibly attractive women be interested in him.
Yeah.
But again, I don't really hold it against the show. It wasn't. I don't think it was bad. It was just one of those noticeable points, you know.
Yeah, they didn't have time to wait till season 4 for MJ to show any interest, you know, anything like that. But I think MJ wasn't necessarily interested in a relationship with him. She just thought he was all right. So she went to the dance with him. Then after that, they didn't really. She was part of the main. Well, she was part of his supporting cast, but she didn't really do anything with him at that point.
True. There were certainly 2 love interests there and 2 side interests. I think even that isn't
Betty, Liz,
noticeable.
And Gwen, you know, the Black Cat, but that's only a Spider-Man. Which itself is kind of weird.
No, I think that counts. So I'm going to count that 5 incredibly hot women interested in him because it is still him, you know, whether they can see his face or not.
Yeah.
But anyway, as I say, I don't want to get hung up on that being a bad point. I didn't find it a bad point. I just found it a very noticeable point.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting how they threw all these kind of characters in a blender and had them there immediately, you know, because in the comics there's so much time between these people being introduced. You know, you've got so it's like Betty's his main love interest for a while in the comics, and then Liz is kind of there, but she's more interested in Flash for pretty much the whole time they know each other up until they graduate. And then Gwen's introduced, and then quite a bit after that MJ's introduced, and Black Cat's not until a long time after that. So they condensed it all very quickly.
Well, if you actually analyse what they're all there as and their connection to Peter, then you do see that they're all different. And I think that's been done on purpose to give you all the angles that Peter's love life can go through all in the one.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many series they thought they would get. I don't know how many plot lines they thought they'd be able to go through, but they certainly weren't going to get 4 decades or whatever it is worth of comics, which actually needs this progression through serious relationships, casual relationships, and it being laid out like that. But given that we quickly went on, well, not quickly, we went into in the series 2, you see things like Shakespearean themes. I've kind of persuaded myself that somebody has actually sat down and just wrote out what are all the different love connections, problems and issues that Peter could have, and he's been given somebody in each slot, almost like an analysis of it. Maybe, you know, you've got the person that's interested in you but you don't even notice, you've got the person that you're interested in superficially, you've got a relationship connection that in the end doesn't work. With Black Cat, you've got the if you could be somebody that you're not, who could you attract? And I'm missing one, Betty. The being interested in somebody much older than you. They're all a different thing. And it's possible that that's the reason that I didn't find it any more than noticeable. I didn't find it bad because they actually hit a different angle in the plotting each time. So you're still getting something new, so you don't think of it as boring or too out of the ordinary. You know, if you had 4 cheerleaders coming at him, it would have just been wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, you do make it under too much of analysis. I'm still thinking that it's a bit... I don't know, actually. It's not a bit too much white man power, is it? I don't know. Is it just because it's an interesting analysis into different relationship plot lines, or is it worse than that? I don't know. Maybe we should move on. Not worry about it.
Yeah, he has a different dynamic with all of those women, which is good. You know, it's not just, oh look, here's the other Gwen, but hot. You know, that kind of thing. It's not like MJ didn't show up as a scientifically intelligent person, but who didn't wear glasses. You know, she showed up and she was very much a free spirit, and that's something that Peter could be attracted to in that sense, because it's, you know, it's different to anyone he's met before, so therefore interesting.
Well, yeah, and I'm still just slightly hung up on this white man power thing. Actually, I just want to go back to that. I think, just trying to think, are the women portrayed well? And I'm just thinking, Gwen, she's very intelligent, noticeably so. When the fighting occurs and Spider-Man turns up, she doesn't stand in the corner and scream. You know, she phones the police. She's thinking. And I personally do think it's got to be reasonable that when you're hung from a giant gorilla balloon, you do actually get to scream, and it's not a bad thing for your, you know, your woman power.
Feminist. I would scream if that happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And MJ is definitely part of the alt scene, and she's got that curious, completely in charge of herself, whilst actually not being completely in charge of her emotions thing going on, but she's still confident with it. So she's certainly not. She gets to decide who dances with her all the way through the show, I think. So that works. And Black Cat is a little bit less defined than the others, but is still in charge of herself. I don't think she was ever defined by anybody else. Oh no! Who was it? Oh, the other woman was. What's the other one? The other evil woman, Silver something or other.
Silver Sable.
Yeah, she's possibly not a strong female character, completely defined by her father, but potentially, I guess, that is still very human, so why shouldn't it be there? Yeah,
and she was introduced very late as well, so there was stuff they could do with her later that we never get to do. So, I mean, it's, you know, not everybody's well defined when you first meet them, and it's just, the idea. Here she is. She's also related to this guy. That's a problem, you know. But even Black Cat was, you know, revealed to be the daughter of the guy that killed Uncle Ben, which was, you know, a departure from the comics for sure. And I'm not entirely sure it was necessary. I mean, I suppose it did help Peter move on from that incident in a sense, as in when he was confronted with this guy again and realised, he didn't actually mean it. You know, there was no animosity behind that. It was a mistake, and he's willing to pay for it. And I suppose it gives Black Cat something that would carry into the next season, where she's resentful of Spider-Man for leaving him in prison or something. Yeah,
we'd never know what they planned with that. It was no,
but it was one of those. Oh, of course she's the daughter of that guy, because, you know, this New York has 20 people in it. You know, so.
Well, yes, yeah.
And I mean, I'm not sure. Well, I wasn't too keen on that reveal, because I don't think they did enough interesting with it.
It brought her into the prison, which is what it needed to do, and therefore it was a bit subject to the whims of the plot.
Yeah. And then, I mean, confronting that guy once again, after he's been through a bit as Spider-Man and learned some lessons, and he's learned a bit more about how the world works, and getting to that point where he can, well, not quite forgive him, but at least see a different side to him. I think that's, you know, a really powerful thing.
It was a good plot development for Peter.
Yeah.
As you say, putting Black Cat in there was not necessarily, and possibly was only added to have the other side of an argument put in. So there could be two sides to debating the proposal put by the man himself, because he comes along and says, I'm this, I'm that, but I've chosen my route after the fact. But then you want someone to be saying, I'm pro this guy, and I think he deserves good things to happen to him, and somebody to say, I'm against this guy, and Peter can't do that by himself. So it does need somebody. If you want to present this argument of, this is the killer, should we help him and let him find his redemption, or should we let him fall? To do that, you need two sides of an argument. I mean, he could have provided it himself, I suppose. He could have said, let me live, and almost have been begging Peter or trying to persuade Peter to do it. But I think I'm happier that it was a second person. The fact that it was Black Cat, which is another main character, suddenly pushed into the prison, might have felt a bit crowbarred in. But I'm certainly happy the argument was done by a third person rather than the guy himself, because he might have had a hard time trying to persuade a superhero who could quite easily knock him out with a flick of his wrist that not to do something, whereas Peter has to listen to Black Cat because she could go toe to toe with him. Yeah. So I definitely see why they've done it, and therefore I don't say it's bad. It definitely had a real plot purpose. It's just that I can understand why you would think that. Why did it have to be her? Because it feels too convenient that she was also connected into this as well as Peter was.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, that's just one episode, and you have no idea what Black Cat's arc would have been afterwards. So
no, and she is truly freaking awesome. Yeah. I mean, as a character, I don't fanboy very often, but if I did want to go fanboy, I would go over Black Cat in this show.
And she's one of the more problematic characters in comics because she's that kind of seductive, adventurous side that Peter never really nurtures, and she is kind of male gaze written a lot.
Yes.
And it's kind of awkward. And there's an element of it in this version, but it's not too overblown, I don't think.
Tell me something about the scenes there. As somebody who's read the comics, and seeing as we're on Black Cat, the upside down kiss, who did it first? And who copied who?
I think the Raimi Spider-Man film was the first film to do that.
Really?
Yeah.
And when was that one set? When is the Raimi Spider-Man?
It came out in 2002.
Right, so it's 6 years ahead of this, right, so I think, they blatantly stole that then.
Well, homaged, perhaps.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, it's a Spider-Man property, so therefore referencing other versions of Spider-Man is all well and good, I think.
Okay.
But I like that Peter's reaction is like, I had no idea you felt that way about me, and she's just playing with him and disappears.
Yes. Absolutely.
Because he's not ever encountered that before, and he's never...
and he's 16. I mean, you've got to be thinking that if Black Cat ever did actually take the mask off fully, she'd go, "You're 16? Oh my god, that's disgusting! Get away from it!"
Yeah, well, that's exactly.
Because otherwise, again,
comics.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense because it's a natural human reaction you'd want to see. That would work really well.
Unless this version's only 18 or something, but again, it's hard to tell how much older she is than him by just how she's drawn.
I can't believe that the way it's portrayed, the way she speaks, moves, and she is. I mean, I don't know if it quite goes to innuendo, but she is no holes barred. Yeah. There's no way she's 18. She's got to be older than that. I mean, early 20s, fine, but still.
Yeah, it doesn't help that she's voiced by Trisha Helfer, who's like in her 40s or something. Or late by the time this is airing, but...
No, but yeah, she's exactly the right person to be doing that voicing. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a bit of a kind of formative bit on Peter, and kind of circling back to his kind of supporting characters. We haven't talked about Eddie Brock, who's very important. I mean, both in his life and in this show, and they went with the Ultimate Spider-Man comics version almost, where their parents knew each other. Except in Ultimate Comics, he didn't re-encounter him until a bit later on. But in this one, they've been part of each other's life for a long time. And Eddie's a bit older, so he's like college age, which is fine. And so he's a big brother to Peter, which I find quite an interesting dynamic, because it works through the first season, and you sort of see the disintegration of that relationship happen gradually, which is good.
Absolutely, that was very well done, because he's in it right from the start. As I say, he's one of the setups when we're talking about how many people there are on screen at once, and he's in there, and you have a very believable disintegration from very supportive older brother, disappointed older brother, disconnected old friend, down to actually then finding reasons to dislike him, and eventually, of course, turns up the suit and it all goes horribly wrong. But you've got defined stages throughout many episodes that gives you a believable progression. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I like the way it started, where Peter gets the photograph of the lizard, and Eddie doesn't.
He's
like
disappointed.
The fact that he didn't call the police. He's just sitting there taking photos.
Absolutely.
And later on, it gets, and he forgives him for that, or he doesn't forgive him. He forgets about it, or pushes it aside, because he just says, like, "Don't go all emo, whatever. It's done." But yeah, he doesn't really forgive him. He just kind of, okay, that's happened. I'm just going to let it slide this once. And then as time goes on, the more Peter does, because of being Spider-Man, just, Eddie starts to blame him for everything that goes wrong in his life.
Yeah.
Which is a lot. So it's again, when the symbiote disappears, Peter takes that photo, you didn't do anything, and I've lost my job, and here we go, it's the complete destruction of this kind of close relationship, and you feel it because they are so close to begin with.
I can only add to that I agree. I think his foundation through to villain has worked really well. I think they do that with a lot of them, though. They do very well build up quite a lot of the people. I mean, you got Harry as well, who's build up to what you assume is villain. We are in post spoilers, aren't we? So I can say that his build up is exactly the same. He's a friend. He's constantly betrayed by his work colleague, his friend not coming and helping him with his homework. He's then blasted by his father for not being as good as this other guy, and this other guy that Harry's not even being able to live up to is also not very reliable from Harry's perspective. Yeah. So he's being battered on all sides by people who are not supporting him, and he doesn't know what to believe. So his world turns upside down several times. And even when he gets his shot at being with the It crowd, it's only because of his money, and they still don't accept him all the way through, and it takes him a while to see it. Yeah. That as well is like Eddie. They are both progressive build-ups where the character slowly changes until some inevitable horrible conclusion, or not, as in the case of Harry. But you believe it. You don't question it at all that he could be Green Goblin.
Yeah, well, I mean, Harry doesn't. Well, he does fall out with Peter at one point, but not for long. They do make up.
But he's towards that end point. He's always glaring at him. Peter does something, and it takes the scene away from Harry. Yeah. There's even that point later on when Harry's in the It crowd. He starts to ignore Peter. He starts to push him away. He starts to go with his football, colleagues.
Yeah.
So he's definitely turned his back slightly, and it's not the same as Liz. When Liz has that moment in one of the episodes where she realizes she's talking to a nerd, and the popular crowd comes up, and she suddenly turns on Peter and says something horrible to him. But then they do one of those shots where they show you that she's emotionally upset by that, and they show her face.
Yeah.
And then you get that with Harry. Harry's very much, well, screw you, I've found my place.
Yeah.
He doesn't realise they've not properly accepted him, but he thinks they have, and he moves on, and he's quite happy with that.
Yeah. And I like the relationship they build with Norman as well, between Harry and Norman. There's the bit where he complains to Norman about the fact that Peter didn't show up to help him with his homework, and he's like, stop blaming other people for your own shortcomings, because Norman is this self-made man. He's earned everything he's got, and he just doesn't tolerate weakness. And Harry does have a lot of weaknesses, and obviously he's lacking in nurture. You know, you get that. You also get that cliched shot of the dinner table, you know, where they're sitting on the other side of a massive dinner table, and I think that's Norman and his wife are doing that.
Yes,
and it's just huge. You know, it's pretty obvious, but again, it's that narrative shorthand thing. It's like, this guy is, you know, this guy's achieved a lot, but he's not close to anyone, and he won't let himself be close to anyone because emotion's a weakness, you know.
And as long as it's done well, I don't think you suffer from it. The fact that it is in there as these horrible biting comments, because they spend a lot of time through season 1 where Norman is just a secondary character as far as Peter's concerned. He might actually very well be creating the Vulture and the Rhino and so on, but it's just a business interest. There's no more than that. He's not going for Peter, you know. These connections to Harry are just this occasional undermining comment that comes throughout lots of episodes. So he's well built up. Stereotypical as it might be, it's not to the extent that it's boring or annoying, because it's used as foundation.
Yeah, and you've also got Norman is very kind of calculated as well. You've got when it turns out that he's framed Harry as the Goblin. You know, he's sprained his ankle,
which, by the way, is awful. There's very few things I don't like about this show, but seeing as you brought it up, I have to go with that final scene where it turns out not only is he the Green Goblin. Right, I'm really going to spoiler it, so if anybody doesn't want to know about the end of season 2, you got to stop now, turn back on in 5 minutes. But so not only is he actually the main villain after some pretty good red herrings, but he also survives, and he's in his holiday Hawaiian shirt, and he does a look to camera. It was just, I did not like any part of that whatsoever. It's just so cringeworthy. Well, the whole rest of the show so clearly dodges the cliches and the ridiculous. And sometimes, I admit, sometimes it comes a bit close to the ridiculous one, but still manages to dodge it. This one time, they crash through the barrier. To be fair to them, if you're going to crash through the barrier, I guess you go as far and as hard as you can, and that's the way they went for it, but still, just madness.
Well, I thought prior to that it was interesting. I mean, I remember reading an interview with, I think it was Greg Weisman, the effectively the showrunner. He was talking about how he wanted the identity of the Green Goblin to be a mystery again, because it hasn't been ever since. That would
have been great.
The Raimi film doesn't treat it as a mystery. You know, it shows you what Norman Osborn becomes right away. So they wanted that to be a mystery. So throwing in the red herring that it was Harry in season 1 really worked, because I actually wasn't expecting it. And Peter had made up his mind that it was actually Norman by that point as well. So when it's revealed to be Harry first, I was like, oh, wow. So is Norman going to take up this mantle later, or what's going on? And I was quite surprised by it. But then the reveal that was like, I sprained my own son's ankle to get the heat off me, that kind of stuff. And the limp was actually a calculated move that he was going to exploit later. You know, he wasn't actually limping. It was like it was a bit like I anticipated you coming to my home and doing this, so I set up all this elaborate stuff to, but
exactly. It was 80s TV special. It was Murder She Wrote does Spider-Man. It's just the best thing that they actually brought up though in that final episode reveal is the bit where Norman and Harry both turn to her and both go, is it Mum that's done this? And there's got this silent woman that's been in the background, never gotten a word for numerous episodes, and there's part of your brain that ticks over and goes, that's amazing, it has to be her, that would just be the best thing ever.
Well,
and then it turns out, no.
Else it could be,
so it has to be her, process of elimination. That would have been much better than turning out to be Norman, but no, twist on the twist on the twist, and it wasn't him, it was a twist of the ankle instead. Get out.
Yeah, and I think I was... I don't know, I think when I first saw the reveal, I dismissed the whole idea of this weird wonder drug just suddenly making him a criminal mastermind. And, because it's like, what you know about Harry is he's not that clever. He's not able to do what the Goblin was doing, and the drug wouldn't necessarily bring all that out in him. And it turns out that it didn't, because, of course...
Yes. Which is that's one of those things, though, isn't it? It's where you go, oh... I was right. And it's disappointing because it's just, it's just a truth.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a shame. But the thing is, if I just forget that one part, otherwise, the Green Goblin, I think, was pretty damn excellent. It's a little bit Mark Hamill. So if you've seen that in the Batman cartoons, you can't help but think, oh, have you sort of copied that as a base principle? However, as a Nazi villain, I was still enjoying it enough not to be too upset by that comparison.
Yeah, and it's really good how he weaved in and out of the criminal underworld doing his own thing. You know, it was he was clearly opposed to everybody, but the motivation for it remains unclear. You know, why was he trying to cause this much unrest between the rival gangs and things? But I found it interesting how he was poaching Tombstone's henchmen off him.
Yes.
And there was that, that scene in the dinner party and where Tombstone makes that reference to, it's a big risk, especially when you've taken so many, looking at the two guys in pumpkin masks.
Yes.
He knows, like, you used to work for me and I'm going to find out who you are, and then there'll be trouble.
But this is another reason why I don't like the reveal at the end, because the Green Goblin's motivation works perfectly as Harry's alter ego. Harry is not in control of his life. He is put upon by everybody and doesn't really know where he's going. Give him some drugs, his brain can't handle it, the chemistry goes wrong, and out comes this alter ego who takes charge of everything, who puts everybody else down, who puts himself first, and knows exactly what he wants. I'd like some ultimate world-mending power, please. If you could have some of that, I'd like that from everybody. If you'd all just bow down. So, as Harry's alter ego, it's too good. And then it turns out, it's Norman, who, as you say, doesn't have a reason for doing this, unless he's just mistaken and the serum has changed his brain chemistry too, in which case you've got somebody who is a clever mastermind who's just been given megalomaniac tendencies. So I've talked myself into it. As long as the drug is altering his brain, it takes that mastermind, adds more megalomania, and the Goblin wants to control everything.
Yeah.
I want to control business. I want to control the top of the city. I want to control the underworld. I want to control everything because I should be in charge. So it sort of does work, but because that's undermined by the fact that because they've set up Harry so well and it fits Harry even better, you think it's disappointing that it's Norman because it just works on paper, whereas Harry works from all angles.
Yeah. Well, almost the biggest clue as well is that the Green Goblin is clearly a bit taller than Harry is.
Yeah. That actually, I think, is again a bit disappointing. Maybe I would have wanted that to be somehow hidden.
Yeah.
Because you're right, because they pointed out that Captain Stacy works out from Spider-Man that way, therefore they are thinking about it, therefore they have drawn the characters correctly.
Yeah.
Then you suddenly realise that they've put this Easter egg in for you to find and know about, but unfortunately it leads me to disappointment, because even though physically is the right size to be the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn is not anywhere near as good emotionally as Harry is to be the Green Goblin.
Yeah, and they don't do any work on explaining why Norman decided to become the Green Goblin as well. He just is.
Presumably, season 3, they might have gone into this. Well, he became megalomaniac. He decided he's just not in control. He thinks he is, but he's not. And they could have built that up.
Well, it's normally exposure to his own chemicals causes him to go nuts. And and he develops this alternate personality kind of idea. And
he would have just pursued that. I'm
assuming. Probably, but it would have.
But it wouldn't have been as good. No. So I wouldn't have missed that. I have to say.
Plus, everything about Norman is very calculating and very deliberate, and the Goblin's the opposite of that in a lot of ways. I mean, he clearly has some kind of plan, but it's almost as if he's just inciting chaos just for the fun of it. And
speaking of that, as I say, I don't really fanboy very often, but I did really just enjoy the Green Goblin just for fun. Yeah. And I've got a request, actually. Seeing as you put in your wee noises for your spoiler warnings, can we have the Green Goblin's bomb explosion in the little scream that's a bit Michael Jackson like, ew, because that's just amazing. Yeah. I think you should put that in a few times just to liven it up. That'd be great.
Shame no one's swearing all the time. It would be a perfect swear cover.
I can put some swearing in if you want. I'll swear a couple of times and give you a chance to use it.
There we go. Well, feed it in. Yeah. So yeah, the Goblin's a villain who's there throughout, and I quite like that he shows up throughout. I mean, it's not that we're going to deal with this in one episode. The mystery exists throughout the entire first season, then it turns out it continues into the second season. But he's gone for most of the second season because the whole idea is Harry's back and he's better, and then you see that point where his life is spiraling again.
Yeah.
And then the Green Goblin shows up again, and it's that misdirect, and then and you get all this. Oh yeah, it turns out it's this other guy that I fired, maybe, and then oh yeah, I hired the chameleon to be me, and all that stuff. But
seeing as you bring that up, actually, there's something I noticed very much. I've taken a note about the difference between this season 1 and season 2.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm pretty much would give season 1 10 out of 10 if I was reviewing it. There's few shows I would do that, and I'm glad to give season 1 that high score. Season 2, I'd probably drop to a 9 out of 10, which is still a good score, but the reason I would do that is because you start to notice the power creep and the push towards more exceedingly odd things, and it actually comes in right at the start of season 2 and carries on with it. And that stuff about the red herring, it's first of all it's this guy employed, then it's Mysterio, and all this extra stuff, that push towards a slightly more ridiculous, to say it's right there from the beginning. The first 2 episodes, when you bring in Mysterio, he's way over the top. Mm-hmm. The Hunter, he's clearly over the top, just this nutsy guy that decides to come and hunt in New York. Why? What are you doing? Yeah. But, it's comic book and it's fine and it works, but it's just that it heads a bit more in that direction, especially when you start noticing some of the themes that they use. There's a Shakespearean episode, or 2, in fact, really, but there's one where they actually start quoting from Shakespeare.
Yeah.
There's an opera episode where they have a fight to the I can't even tell you what opera is playing because I'm not that into my opera, but where there's the big 3-way fight between the villains and Spider-Man. And then there's also another one where Green Goblin almost seems to take the mickey out of it himself by deciding, right, it's opening night, I'm going to do some rhyming couplets in honour of your Shakespearean thing that I don't know is actually happening, but somehow feel the need to do. And these extra things, because they're just a bit more extreme, you start to think, did they have to put that in to keep attention? Because I was actually happier with the subtleties that were in season 1, and I didn't personally feel like I need them. I didn't hate them, still give it a 9 out of 10, but I thought, is that a direction they were going in? Because if they'd have gone into season 3, much as I would have liked to have seen it, I wouldn't have liked to have seen that form of plot expansionism.
Yeah. Me being familiar with all these characters from the comics, I didn't largely mind these things. I thought Mysterio was a slightly different angle what we've seen before. I like the fact that he pretends that he can use magic, but he can't. That's new. Before it just seemed like it was powers that he had, and then every subsequent appearance of Mysterio after that, it's like, why is he still falling for this crap? It's like, right, he uses special effects. You figured that out the first time you fought him. Like, it can't all be that convincing every single time, so it almost gets to the point where you have to give Mysterio real magic, otherwise he's no longer a threat.
I think they managed to establish it well enough, though, that wasn't too upset, because they turn in this, some of the magic, they turn on other characters. Yeah. When they're on the bridge fighting, they turn the illusory dragons against the police.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there thinking, yeah, if this thing came at me in a world full of superheroes, I'm not going to risk it. I'm going to dodge.
Yeah.
You're right, Spider-Man should know it by now, but the fact that they actually put Mysterio's powers onto other people, I think, still gives it some legs.
Because it gets to the point where Spidey's spider sense will figure out that it's not actually a threat, and then that's it. It'll pass through him harmless.
He does use gadgets as well, though, doesn't he? Because the little goblin chaps are actually robots, so it's not like it's all illusion.
Things. Yeah, those are weird. And Spider-Man hates them as well. He gets the place. Like, not these things again.
Well, they do actually fulfill a certain slot in cartoons, especially modern cartoons. I'm thinking in almost anime. They're creepy cute, as in they've got little cute lines, but they're actually quite, jokes and comments and no, I'm going not again, all that kind of nonsense. But they're actually quite demonic as well. I think they would have been very popular with some parts of the audience.
Yeah,
and they were alright. They were comic. They were just comic effect, like Jameson, really.
And I like that Mysterio was hinted at in the first season as well. He's part of the Chameleons crew.
Yeah,
he was just one of them, like the Tinkerers there as well.
Absolutely, more good foreshadowing. Fits in the whole thing.
And it's a slightly different twist on the Mysterio origin from the comics, as in the comics it's kind of an unrelated thing. It's something that it doesn't even appear in an issue. It's just something that was routinely dealt with. He was a criminal that was brought down by Spider-Man at some point in the past. And when the reveal happens, he's like, "Who are you? I don't remember you." Like in the 90s cartoon, you've got this, "You don't remember a helicopter explosion on a bridge?" And he's like, "I get this 3 times a week," and it's that kind of, I quite like that. It's just there's a routineness to what Spider-Man does, and he's not going to remember everybody it catches.
Whereas that's good, I'm glad they didn't do it here, because that's the kind of exposition that I really don't like.
Well, I mean, they did do it because you had the bit where it's like, "Remember me?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, you were the," and he gets he makes the wrong prediction. He says,
but the character was in the show. Yeah. It wasn't just, "Do you remember this thing that happened between us before the show even started? And I'm trying to set up a foundation plot point here so we can just move on." Exposition. Yeah. The character was already in it. Even when you got the Rhino and Sandman, they're in it. We understand that they've been arrested before, but in the show they're arrested here. Spider-Man catches them here. It's not just we've got this assumed relationship on screen. It's all built up, and I much prefer that. I mean, it's a good joke. No, I'm sorry, I don't remember you. I'm more important to you than you are to me. Sorry, you lose. It's not a bad joke, but because I hate exposition so much, and I'm so proud and pleased to see the lack of exposition in this Spectacular Spider-Man. I'm just glad that they did it this way.
Yeah. And Mysterio, I didn't mind him. I thought he was okay, handled quite well, but Craven is probably my least favourite thing about the show in general. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of that character anyway. But I think you'd probably like him because you talk about villains that have honour, and he is the poster child for honourable stuff, so he'll give Spider-Man a fighting chance in the hunt, which is the important thing to him. But the turning him into that weird lion hybrid thing just didn't work for me at all. Because
I think that's what I mean by
skills in the comics.
That's what I mean by it kind of gets exaggerated to an extent that I wasn't quite so taken with. The honour thing does fit in with the general theme of Spider-Man. Not going to challenge that, but it starts to get to the point where, is this guy a bit over the top?
Well, the thing with Raven in the cartoon, he's very the opposite of honourable, really. He likes to cheat, he's duplicitous, and he wants to cut corners. So, he tries to take Spider-Man down on his own terms once, and then he's like, "Nope, screw this, I'm getting upgraded." And then he becomes far less interesting after that.
Yeah, the other villains are certainly much better done. Tombstone, big fan of Tombstone actually as one of the villains, especially because he was trying to keep a image that worked in the public, although we never really got the explanation of how the public did not freak out at his white skin and sharp pointy teeth, which I would have liked to have heard.
Yeah, well, it's like
they appear to have accepted that, so let's not worry about it too much.
Odd, but he's above board.
Yeah, and that appears to be New York's accepted stance on him. And all right, fair enough, we've dealt with this, but either way, it's
Other than that, he's the Kingpin analog.
Yes.
the 90s cartoon had the Kingpin in that space.
Yeah.
Whereas, philanthropist by day, gangland criminal by night, and which is fine. And it's good. He's got that front, and he's got that acceptable front, and the background to that is just seedy and horrible, and I like the relationship he builds with Spider-Man as well throughout, where it's they help each other when he helps Spider-Man when it stands to benefit him. Spider-Man will help him because he doesn't like seeing people getting killed, and they've got the idea that he's like, I don't really care if you stop a supervillain, I'm more interested in my criminal little henchmen getting stuff done in the background. So you distract the supervillains over here, and I'll handle this. I'll just steal stuff in the background, and I'll pay you for the privilege, and which seems like quite a sweet deal when you think about it. But it's the I can't look the other way side of things.
It's nice to see as well, because he is almost the end of level boss.
Yeah.
That he is better enough fight than some of the other ones. So he is actually, at the start, certainly more than a match for Peter. And then obviously Peter's skills develop as he goes on. But I think they get the power levels quite nicely in this, because I forget which one it is of the four. What's the name of the group in the opening episode? The four of them, the group that the Enforcers. The Enforcers are more than a match for Peter at the start, because they do beat him.
Yeah.
In that first or second episode, and then he moves on, and then he builds up more, gets more capable, and he can start to take these other people. But then you bring in Tombstone, and he can then put Peter down until eventually you move on a bit more, and then we get to the opera episode, and then Peter's just about managing to handle a room full of supervillains. There's a nice development there.
Yeah, and I think I like how they handled a lot of the fights as well, because they focus on the fact that most of the villains are more powerful than Peter is, so he has to think his way out of every problem, which is great. So his first fight with Doc Ock is about keeping a battery away from him long enough for his tentacles to stop working, and that appears to work until Doc Ock figures out that putting innocents in danger will help turn the tide. The first fight with Rhino, he's completely outclassed, which is great, and the way he thinks his way out of that problem is actually unique for his fighting the Rhino. I've never seen that done before. I mean, if you look at any video game that Rhino's in, it's all about you're going to stand in front of this thing that will hurt him and jump out of the way just as he charges, and you keep doing that until you beat him. And in the comics, there's very little difference to that, really. I mean, there's a little variation, but the way it was like your face is sweating for your whole body because your suit is not porous at all, which is fine under most conditions, but I'm going to put you in a steam tunnel and you'll be defeated. And it's that problem solving that defines his approach to fighting that I really like.
Yeah, I think the same happens with the Lizard as well. The Lizard beats him in a straight fight, but then he has to work out a clever way of... I forget how he does it, but he doesn't win in...
He puts him in icy...
Oh, that's it. Yeah. So probably most of his fights against the supervillains are won by intelligence more than physicality.
And even in the second season episode where Sandman appears to die, even though he doesn't, and you've got Peter appeals to his better nature, because they establish early on that he's not a bad guy. He just steals. He's not a murderer. And once he realizes that he's doing harm to innocents, that's too much for him.
Yeah.
So they did really good groundwork with establishing the stakes of the fight and using the kind of surroundings and using his intelligence and doing everything to make it dynamic and interesting and make the resolutions feel more like he just punches them a few times, which tends to happen a lot in these sorts of things. Even in the 90s Batman cartoon, he would ultimately get in some kind of fist fight with someone and then he'd win because he's the better fighter. But I quite like I need to use this environment to defeat this guy. What are his weaknesses? How do I exploit them?
It fits the character so well too, because they made a clear point of them making him a scientist. He is definitely a thinker. So if they'd have diverted from that, it probably would have felt a bit odd. Because he does think like a scientist in that sense of, right, you're a lizard, right, I'm going to cool you down. Yeah. That is basic biology. So yeah, that's very nice for that character.
Yeah, and the biggest trouble I think he had was Venom, because it took a while to figure out his weakness. And even then, the weakness wasn't exploited the second time out. Or the first time out, actually. The sound weakness wasn't exploited, because I quite like the fact that he'd kind of purged all negative emotions and appealed to the symbiote to, yeah, you can have me. And you get that whole rejection on Eddie Brock's part when it leaves him for its preferred host.
Well, that's a nice way of putting in the true origin story, actually, as well, because arguably they didn't need to do the origin story. As you said before, I completely agree with that. We don't need to see it for those of us that have been around long enough to have seen it 3 or 4 times, add the comics in 1 million times, But arguably any cartoon that is aimed at kids is aimed at a new generation of kids, because you'll get a fresh stock of 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds and everything every year, So there's going to be people that are still seeing Spider-Man for the first time in its current iteration. So it's not a bad thing for it to have it, and using it here as the emotional reason why he's able to then defeat Venom is brilliant. That's a great way. That's an angle that nobody's really done before. And I can't deny that that's executed very well, because even then, he defeats the villain not by beating him up.
Yeah.
He defeats the villain by being his true honourable self.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they did the kind of slow corruption, and the suit changes as he becomes more under its thrall.
Yeah.
So it starts off as being a black version of his original costume, and then by the end of the second part, or midway through the second part, it more resembles how it looked in the comics, because and it gives you that kind of visual clue about how much it's corrupting him over time.
There's a level of detail there that's not even unique. There's a few things I've taken notes on actually along those lines, where people have really put effort into to every single part of this. When he's going through that transition, the scene change graphic is no longer spiders running across the screen; it's ooze going across the screen.
Yeah,
which is a nice little detail. Another one I wanted to give mention to, because I was just so impressed by it, was when Doc Ock and Spider-Man are fighting on Coney Island. There's a part where Doc Ock picks Spider-Man out of a group of fluffy toys, and it looks exactly like one of those grab an alien games. We've got the claw coming down, and I just think that's a nice little joke that didn't need to be in there.
Yeah.
And arguably is not a very important part of this at all, because nobody talks about it, nobody refers to it. It could have been a moment where Doc Ock makes a little joke, a pun like Peter does, but it wouldn't have been right for that character. It would have just been because the plot needs it, and I would have hated that. But as a little wink to the audience, that really works, because we get an extra little joke out of it if you notice it. That detail is just everywhere.
Yeah, and there was a similar one where he's I can't remember if it's a rhino or not, but he saves a man and a woman from something that's dangerous, and he webs them hangs them from a lamppost, and then as he's moving past, he says, "You can thank me later, dude."
Yes.
And then the guy smiles because he's been stuck with this hot woman. He has no choice but to talk to for a little while.
Yeah.
Until someone gets them down from there or whatever.
Yeah.
There's lots of little tiny little things in there that you blink and you'll miss them, and the kind of it's the Pixar thing. Pixar, they do the kind of the obvious jokes for kids, which is fine. So the visual gags or the obvious puns or whatever else, and then you've got that extra level for adults. That can just watch it and enjoy as well. So that claw game one you're talking about, that's it's a little thing that, be picked up on by older people in the audience probably, rather than younger people.
Which is most welcome, I think, because even if I wasn't watching this, I can imagine that there would be other people my age watching it. If if mum or dad is eating breakfast with their kids and the kids are watching Saturday mornings, I can believe that one of the two of them could also be watching the show and maybe get a little something out of it, whilst they've got a 10-minute break. I think it only adds to it. It certainly doesn't do any harm.
Yeah, don't talk down to your audience. That's what I always say about kids' shows. Because
did I correctly notice, by the way, that something that must definitely have been something for the adults, a Monty Python joke in Season 2, Episode 1?
Remind me what the joke was?
There's... I'm trying to... I've got my notes here, and my notes aren't good enough, so I must have been writing in a hurry. Somebody says, "What are you going to do? Bite my knees off?" So it must have been somebody who was incapacitated somehow and couldn't have used their arms and legs. And so they make exactly the same joke as the Black Knight does in almost exactly the same circumstance.
It could have been, yeah. Don't see why not.
I'm going to have to go back and check that now. I'm sure they put that. I mean, there's the opera, which you're not expecting. There's the Shakespearean quotes, which you're not really expecting, which I have to assume were the actual lines from Midsummer Night's Dream, but they are disturbingly relevant to what's going on, because there must be lines in Midsummer Night's Dream about a spider coming down and this, that, and the other with their webs and bringing in the love matches and so on. You're just thinking, did somebody just notice this and think, I have to do this parallel? I just have to. I need to make my English degree worthwhile, man. Otherwise, it was all just a waste of time. Or was it just a colossal coincidence? I'm not sure, but 8-year-old kids not going to appreciate that. That's definitely in there for the other part of the audience who just needs something, now and again. Yeah,
and I think there's a good amount of sophistication throughout the series. They're not writing a kids' cartoon. They're writing a well-structured TV show. They definitely are, or definitely were.
Yeah.
It's not like the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, which I actually like, because it's like Family Guy without the swearing. But it is like Family Guy without the swearing. It's stupid.
Right.
It's definitely for the younger audience, and it has its appeal, but I'll take this any day of the week because it's what I want to see. It's everything I want to see, and I'd love if a live action superhero show could be half as good as this sometimes,
and with all that stuff in it,
with twice as long to do it,
Yeah, with all that good stuff in it as well, I did notice that they even managed to get on top of that a connection back to the old 80s cartoons I used to watch. I think they don't linger on it too heavily, certainly into Season 2, but at the start of Season 1, did you notice that at the end of every episode there's a reflection on the morality that we used to get in, for example, He-Man, and at the end everybody would laugh in He-Man, ha ha ha, we have won, and we have learned this new lesson, it's amazing. And they do that at the end of the certainly Spectacular Spider-Man Season 1. He reflects back on a lesson. The first episode, it's about family and Aunt May, and I can't get to my notes quick enough to say what they do through Season 2 and 3, but they put that in there. So there's not only are they managing to get something in for everybody, a bit for the adults, a bit for the teenagers, a bit for the kids who are the main audience, but they're also still fulfilling that role that cartoons used to fulfill when I was a kid, at least. How old I am now, God. But of not only giving kids entertainment, but based around an emotionally important plot point that even as a kid who is not a superhero can still apply to their everyday life because it's to do with his relationships, everybody around him. So I think that's missing, and I use that word on purpose, from some of the modern shows that I'm seeing. I don't think it was rude. I don't think it was unwelcome. I didn't mind it there at the end, actually, and saw a great purpose in it.
Yeah, well, there was the biggest example of that, I think, or certainly one that comes to mind, is when he fights Montana, aka the Shocker, in episode 4. Is it episode 4? It's where he finally gets the photography right after spending like 3 episodes trying. It's like, this photo would be great if my arm were 2 feet longer and things like that. He just keeps screwing it up, and he has a bad camera, and then he's like, oh look, I've got money, I'm going to buy so much stuff, and then and something Shocker says resonates with him about a man honouring his responsibilities. And even though it's a villain that's telling him this, it's it stands out because responsibility is that buzzword for him anyway. It kind of took that, it's like, holy crap, even, this is important to this guy as well, and he's like, he's a bad guy from my perspective, and at the end of the episode he kind of realises that he has, Aunt May is his responsibility, and he has to honour that, and he has to do what he can to protect her and support her and so on. That was quite an important one. But yeah, it does do that throughout. And I always like the little end, the last second where you would see the spider logo in some kind of configuration that again fit the theme of the episode as well.
Oh, I didn't notice that. That's how at the
end of every episode you would see his face contorted in some way. So,
I see. Yeah.
So it would like turn into a love heart when he was with Liz, or whatever else, or it turned black when he was wearing the suit. And things like that, and that's a nod to the comics as well, where they would do little things like that here and there. But it also fits in terms of the tone of the show as well. And
there's only one thing I noticed that I wondered if I wonder if some of the things were purposely done or misjudged. There's one that I noted down. The humour's great. The humour is based in science as well, which again fits the character perfectly. So many times he makes a science joke. Yeah. There's one joke that I particularly liked, but I thought, is any kid really going to enjoy this? Where he's fighting Doc Ock and he says something along the lines, oh yeah, well, the arms being proportional to sanity is not being proved yet. Now I just ruined that joke. I can't deliver it well, I know, but just the word proportional used in a joke, I was thinking, is that really going to work for you kids? But I guess these things aren't too. There weren't too many of those, so maybe it was just a freebie for the adults, that one.
And it's a joke you can grow into, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so.
You'll get it when you watch it a couple of years later, kind of thing. And there was a good thing about with Doc Ock as well, where he calls him an insect. And
he tries to correct him.
Yeah, and then later on he calls them arachnids. And it's that little learning thing, No.
Oh, that's development in the jokes. God, that's meta development. That's just, I'm even more astounded now.
Yeah. Does he not say something like insects have 6 legs, spiders have, arachnids?
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
But if Doc even learns, that's very impressive.
Yeah.
Right, so I think that just proves it. Then they've got something for every age category, and it does work. Yeah.
And since we're on Doc Ock, I quite like the portrayal of him as well, making him out to be this meek kind of almost loser who's just put upon by Osborn and lacks confidence, and then he suddenly he goes. I kind of feel like he goes too far the other way once he gets he's in his accident and he has the arms, because in season 2 he's like, well, even at the end of season 1 it's like, right now I'm a criminal mastermind, and I'm going to recruit these 6 villains and all this stuff, and he has his little underwater lair. God knows how he got that, but things.
He suffers in season 2 from that expansionistic principle. That's why I would rate season 2 slightly lower. Not bad. Wouldn't rate it badly, but it is things like that. Yeah, that brings it down, because it's just a little bit more forcing, because it needs to be a little bit more over the top, because they think we're not paying attention anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, or they sensed cancellation coming and they wanted to do this with Doc Ock.
Maybe.
Yeah, but I think he's really good to start with. I like that you see him early on, like so many of the other characters. You get to the point where, he even has the arms early on. And he helps Osborn create these villains. And he's feeling kind of cagey about it because he doesn't want to be responsible for killing people. And, and his reaction when Flint Marco appears to be dead, but it just turns out that he hasn't reformed yet. And Osborn's like, sweep up, try again. And he's like, holy crap, I've killed someone.
Yeah.
And then once he gets the... once he's in the accident, it's all about, I need this powerful battery for my arms now. And that's his motivation for that first fight. And then, it goes a bit off the rails once he forms the Sinister Six.
It's not to the extent that I didn't enjoy it, but there is that almost natural expansionism principle that sometimes gives you pause for thought, maybe,
Although I did like how the Sinister Six could only be defeated with him in the black suit at first. Because it shows, he struggled with these individually, and now he has to deal with 6 of them, and then the suit does it for him.
Yes.
And then it's like the second episode of season 2. It's like, here they're back again, and you've no black suit to help you this time. And it's a really good way of building the stakes, because it's like, holy crap, he's not in a good way this time.
And it goes to the same argument as we said before about getting your power levels right. It makes every fight believable. As you say, it makes the threats believable. He's actually in trouble when he's in trouble. As adult shows could really learn a lot just from these really basic principles.
Yeah. Yeah, because you know how powerful he is relative to one of those villains, because you spend the time seeing him overcome that villain, and there's a bit of luck in there, as in he manages to lure Rhino at the right place, or Sandman's dealt with in the right way, or whatever. They're all dealt with through circumstance rather than him being actually more powerful than them. And then when all 6 of them are together, he doesn't have a strength boost. It's what's he going to do?
It's one of those things that makes me curse some people who talk about I've seen it online. I've seen people talking about the theory of writing, dramatic scripts. And one of the things that every time I see it online, I hate so much. When adult shows, they say, dramatic license, darling. It's okay for this to happen because it serves the drama. And in my mind, any time I've ever seen that, it undermines the plot and I don't enjoy it. Whereas you get this kids' cartoon where everything is set in realism, people respond as they would, power levels are as they would be, and the main character and hero just has to deal with that.
Yeah.
It's all just so superior because it means so much more.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like they're cutting too many corners to get things to work.
Absolutely.
We've built this world, we've spent time building it, and now it's like when these 6 villains are facing Peter when he doesn't have a black suit to enhance all his abilities, he's not, he's kind of screwed. And he's also burnt his tongue on some hot cocoa at this time as well, which is not in his favour either. So he's trying to quip and it's not even working because they can't make out what he's saying.
Yeah, great detail.
Yeah. It's all like wonderfully built, and the Sinister Six, I like how they're just as much of a hindrance to each other as they are to Spider-Man as well. Which is, well trodden territory when villains team up. They have their own agendas or whatever, and so you've got like Sandman and Rhino. They're just happy to be teamed up together, but they're not really interested in Doc Ock's big plan to take over the city or whatever. They're just kind of there because they don't like Spider-Man very much.
Aye.
Yeah, and I think Vulture's probably the worst motivated of them, but...
Probably, yeah. Again, not to the extent I didn't enjoy it, but he's just sort of banged together IKEA villain style, but it didn't ruin it for me. Yeah,
and they're mechanically used quite well as well. They're, you're more useful on this, so, we'll have Vulture swoop in and do this or whatever. They build their skills into how everything works, and it's all well choreographed stuff. I mean, I wish we saw this kind of level of fight choreography in Spider-Man movies. I don't think, even the sort of standard fights, I don't think the films have really built something quite as good as that, at this point, because...
No, being drawn, I suppose, must help with the budget, but even so, that's probably agree.
Yeah, I think the films could be using his intelligence a bit more, and none of them really do.
No, that's in the plotting, and that could definitely be improved. But the thing about maybe the cartoon, there's not such a requirement to have massive action scenes and glorious visuals, whereas films are always going to suffer from that now. So I think the cartoon gets a bit of a free pass there, and But uses it well. Uses it very well.
Although I was constantly impressed on a visual level by watching the fights. I was like, wow, they're doing some really cool stuff here.
Yeah.
They're using his powers well. The camera's moving nicely. Everything's all well established. It looks great. And I think one of the better fights is the second fight with Venom in season 2. Where it's in the school, and just the way it hops location and the stakes keep rising and all that stuff. I think it's really well done. It stops Venom from feeling like a redundant character, which he could have easily done in a second outing.
I'm going to agree, but I think I don't generally pay, or for whatever reason, haven't paid as much attention to those scenes. But what I will say is I probably agree because I didn't notice anything seeming rubbish, boring, or pointless.
Yeah.
So although I have not appreciated it as fully as I might, certainly it didn't get in my way, and it's good for that.
Yeah, and I like the underlying stakes in Venom's return as well, where he shows up and he just says Peter Parker is Spider-Man, then it kickstarts an investigation, and you see,
nobody believes him.
Yeah, you see the different reactions. Like Aunt May's like, "Am I being punked?" and Flash Thompson.
I quite like the scientists who work it out. The Connors who suddenly think, "Oh my God, that makes so much sense. We're leaving. No comment."
Yeah, and Flash Thompson won't, because his ego won't let him believe it.
Yeah,
and you get the point where it's like, if you're not Peter Parker, take off your mask. He's like, just because I'm not Parker doesn't mean I'm going to tell you who I really am. That's like, your logic makes no sense here. But it's quite good that it kind of kickstarts this investigation because it's taken seriously enough, but not too seriously, because no one's going to believe this. Or no one who knows him is going to believe this because they know him.
Yeah.
It's good, and I think the way they handle Venom in general was really good. It's better than, I think the Eddie Brock side of it's better than in the comics, because when he shows up, he's kind of a random in the comics, and then you get his backstory later. But the way he has a backstory all the time, and his relationship with Peter is very well established. So yeah,
absolutely.
And giving the suit a personality as well was a nice touch, but which again in the comics, but it worked for the show as well because it was this corrupting influence. And as we were saying about the origin story, this suit was trying to convince him that his life is ruined because of this one event, and the way he defeats it is, here's what I learned from this one event, so you have no power over me anymore, so I'll see you later.
Yeah, it partnered his origin story very nicely, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. There's sort of other villains we could kind of touch on. Try to think of I think we've covered all the main ones. One of my least favourite was Craven. I also wasn't crazy on Jameson's son either.
No, he's in it for one episode there, and
his son's in it for multiple episodes, but
the Captain Jupiter's in it for one or two at most. I think he's
Colonel Jupiter. Yeah,
Colonel Jupiter. Yeah, got his rank wrong. Although all I'd say about him was he didn't really impact on me too much, positively or negatively. I might assign him to a filler episode almost, but he didn't offend me in any way. Not like the final reveal did.
Yeah, and what other villains do we have? Hammerhead, he's a bit of a henchman, but he's a henchman with style,
and he's quite clever too. He's quite in there in the plots. He can talk Spider-Man around on various points. Yeah, he was good. Well,
there was the flash drive plot point for a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Where it's like, do you think a flash drive would protect you? Do you think it could protect you? And, Tombstone has this power over people, but they make him physically intimidating as well, which helps.
Yeah.
Which again, that's the Kingpin thing, I suppose. I wonder why they just didn't use Kingpin, weirdly, but
I didn't miss him, but I don't know. Worked well enough as it was.
Yeah, and it let them do something new with Tombstone, who was almost a henchman character in the comics as well. I can't think of any other villains that were really there. The Lizard was ferocious, but not much else. The hook behind that was the fact that he was Connors, and there was a limited scope to hurt him, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you've covered my notes on villains already, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there was any other. Well, you had the Enforcers wearing their Iron Man suits, which wasn't the best. Wasn't necessary, really. But yeah, other than that. Yeah, so what would you have done to improve the show if you could choose?
I would have just taken it down a level in season 2. I just call back on that point that I've already brought up, because I don't think it needed it. There's a big danger with a lot of shows that build up and up and up when they go into the 6th and 7th season, because they've done all their main ideas, and they're starting to get a bit desperate. And I just would have reduced that level of over the top that we were seeing. Because if you can do the villains in season 1 without going over the top, then you've already shown you can do comic book without making it too ridiculous. So I just tone it down a little in season 2 and keep the intelligent points that they had on how he defeats villains. Throw in the odd opera and Shakespeare episode now and again, why not? But not ham it up too much. And then I definitely would have changed the ending of season 2, and I would have either kept it as Harry, or I would have had it as Harry's mum as a good red herring, or I simply would have, as you said, the producer wanted to do it, have it as a mystery and left it there. But the reveal was just odd, unnecessarily so, in the same vein as the expansionism into a bit more over the top. And especially because Harry suited the Green Goblin so much better, I would definitely have changed that.
Yeah. In terms of improvements, I've mentioned I didn't like Craven. I would have done something different with him. The Colonel Jupiter thing, I didn't find it too offensive. I suppose it was a bit of a filler episode, but I'd have maybe just not done that at all. I think I would have expanded his world a little bit, in the sense of, that you don't necessarily need to do anything with him but establish that the other Marvel heroes do exist in it. Because he's on his own, and there's no reference to anyone else ever in the run of the show. It's just, this is Spider-Man's world and no one else lives in it, or at least not that you see, but the way people react to him is as if he's the first superhero to ever exist as well. I think there were plans to cross it over with Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes at one point, but both shows got cancelled and they never did that.
It's a shame, because that was a good show too. Yeah,
that'll be another podcast at some point, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Spider-Man does appear in that show, but he's unique to that show. He's not the same. He's not this version.
No.
Yeah.
No. Here's a question for you then. Would you have kept or removed the Stan Lee cameo in season 2?
I'd have kept it.
Yeah.
Why not?
Because that has to be everywhere now.
Yeah. Was season 2? He was like down by the docks or something, wasn't he?
I've got season 2 episode 1 written down. I'd have to go back and watch it now to see exactly what it was, but that's what I've got. Yeah,
it's a Marvel property. There's a Stan Lee cameo. I'm happy with that. No problems whatsoever. But in terms of improving it, I'm not sure I could have done it any better than they did.
No, I certainly couldn't. No.
Yeah. It's just... And I'm sorry it's gone. I mean, I wish I'd got at least another couple of seasons out of it. The only reason they cancelled it is because the TV rights reverted back to Marvel and they went their own direction. That was it. They didn't want a Warner Brothers produced Spider-Man show on their books because there was rights issues.
Such is the way of things.
Yeah, so they just cancelled it, which is a damn shame, because it had so much more to give, I think. We never got to see everything that it was capable of. And there's things that are unresolved, and maybe they are better unresolved, but I'm pretty sure it could have got another at least 2 seasons before it started running out of ideas and becoming stale and bottoming out a little bit.
Oh, I definitely would have watched more.
Yeah. I would have liked to see Peter grow up and go to college and all that stuff, I mean...
that would have taken you into season 5 and 6, so that'd be quite a lot of it.
Yeah, although I feel like even if it had continued, they would have ended the show on a high school graduation thing, that's a natural end point.
Probably would have been a good idea, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, more of it would have improved it for me, I suppose, and a little bit of a sense that he's part of bigger universe in a sense. Although you don't have to have Tony Stark knock at his door or anything like that. You just have to have him, I don't know, acknowledge it. Maybe have the Human Torch fly past in the background or something like that. But it is what it is. Not everything has to be fully connected, I suppose, and this proves it. It's just weird that it's a universe where there's only one character that's decided to use their powers for good.
But it is so focused on his development emotionally that to put the Avengers in would have had a danger of making it more of an action piece than what it was, which was about Peter learning what it is to be a man. And I don't think the plot lines would have fitted in with the Avengers. Maybe you should say they could have had them in the background, like they had a picture of the mayor in the background on Jameson's desk. They could have had it in newspapers to set the scene. But the foreground plot just didn't need it. Yeah. Peter didn't need it.
Yeah, it would have been pretty weird if they'd crossed it over with Earth's Mightiest Heroes, considering the first episode of that has Manhattan risen into the sky by a gravity-controlling villain. It's like, remember that?
It's the wrong.
That was really weird.
it's the wrong. Yeah, it's the wrong thing. The power levels are wrong. The focus of the plots are wrong.
But yeah, it's great stuff, and I'm glad we took the time to sit and talk about it for a period of time.
If I had to pick one highlight, there's most of the stuff that I would say are my favourite points. We've already discussed in some measure. There's only one that we didn't mention that I want to give time to, which is I am so glad at the end of the season they had a bit where Pete and Gwen tell each other how they feel, which is potentially a little bit of a soppy romantic thing, but it was built up through 2 seasons, and so it meant something to me.
Yeah.
And because they actually did it in such a way that wasn't a soap opera, they had a couple of moments where I thought that he could have spoken to Gwen earlier than he did, and I felt that it was slightly stretched out, but never at any point did this become an annoying teen drama.
Yeah.
And even in that reveal, but at the end, it was not, they didn't keep themselves apart, other than Peter being a bit of an idiot about it, but he's a 16-year-old boy and you sort of expect that. So, girls develop emotionally quicker. Gwen knew what she wanted quicker than Pete did. Fine. That works out realistically. But it was never a Dawson's Creek back and forth. A Ross and Rachel just will they, weren't they? Dear God, do I not care anymore, because they're both so horrifically awful. These were both good characters, and I wanted them to get together. And they couldn't. They were blocked to getting together by circumstance, and that's real. Yeah. That can happen. Especially how they did it with Harry being in between them. That's very real. But they actually said what they felt, and I was just this massive cathartic sigh when I thought, thank God I needed to see that. And that's one of my highlights. Yeah,
there's that part where you've got MJ says to Gwen, Peter's still a guy, he might be smart, but he's still a guy, and then
absolutely,
that's her perspective on it. That's her life experience has taught her that, I suppose. But and the way the relationship comes together, because it almost starts with them cheating on Harry and Liz.
Very human.
In the second season, and it's like, but they both realise, no, we can't do this. We have to do it the right way, and then you've got
keeping that honour angle in, which is very important.
And you've got that point where Peter breaks up with Liz, but Gwen can't break up with Harry at that point because he's having a nervous breakdown.
Oh, absolutely. They're kept apart by the circumstance of Harry. Yeah. It's horrible, but it's very believable, very real.
And it's that. I suppose that's the bit where season 2, where they kind of draw a line under the whole thing by having him realise that, and he also reaffirms his commitment to being Spider-Man at roughly the same time as well. So,
if it had ended without those 2 points in it, I think it would have been horrible for us because we needed more. As it is, we miss it and we want more. But if it has to end where it did, as you say, he is Spider-Man. And he is going to stand by Aunt Mary. He is a responsible adult, and he connects with the love interest. So, even though it doesn't properly end, it's a place where you can think, I feel like we've emotionally come to a point that I can be satisfied. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose as a last thing, we could just quickly, because we haven't talked about his relationship with Aunt May throughout, even though it's so important. She's the woman who raised him, and I think they struck a nice balance between the frail older woman of the comics and a kind of modern sensibility as well. Because it's clear that a strong breeze is not going to kill her, like it seems in the comics sometimes. She's a very strong-willed disciplinarian as well. She grounds him very early on in the series, and I quite like that. And it's like your curfew is 10 o'clock. If you're not home, there'll be consequences.
Yes.
And it keeps happening, and then you have the bit where she's ill, but she also doesn't depend on him completely because she sells a cookbook that pays the rent for a while, stuff like that. And I think the relationship is very, very well done because there is that back and forth parent-child thing, and she's they both challenge each other, and she is forced to put her foot down occasionally because he's crossed the line.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a good mother figure for him to have. So, but, I just thought we should at least pay lip service to that because it is there throughout. Yeah, it is there throughout, and the hospital arc comes at the time where he's at his darkest moment anyway. So it's like thematically it all ties together, where it's like he's he's not even aware that she's ill at one point because he's asleep. He's out fighting the Sinister Six, and it kind of shows how wrapped up in his own life he can be and forget about things.
Yep.
It's all good. It's all good stuff. I think they ticked all the boxes and more. And I'd hate to call it just a box ticking exercise, but and there's that kind of here's what I want out of a solid Spider-Man adaptation, and they do it all. They get everything.
They really do.
Yeah, and hopefully the people making the films are going to would watch this show and take some notes.
Yes.
I mean, not what they do in the films just now is bad, but I still think this is better.
It is. It is better. It's much more enjoyable. Yeah. Much more to it. Much more depth.
Yeah. So, unless you have anything else, I think we should wrap up. I mean, it's hard to talk about an entire, even 2 seasons of a show in a couple hours, but we've covered a lot of ground here, I would say.
Absolutely.
And I think we've hit all the major points. I don't think there's anything we particularly left out. Didn't really discuss the Molten Man, that's one villain I forgot, but his gambling addiction didn't work for me, because he's like 16.
I think we touched on...
Yeah.
We went through the villains, the heroes, the supporting characters, plot. Yeah, I think we've...
The Molten Man was a kindred spirit for MJ as well, because he was, I don't believe in relationships either, and that kind of stuff, but he wasn't that interesting, other than, oh look, Liz has a brother who has some problems. That gives her depth, I suppose, but other than that, so do you have any kind of final points?
The way I would leave it would be that I think they've covered the best Spider-Man as a school-age character that I've seen, and in doing that, they also created a TV show that is executed so well in terms of lack of exposition, foreshadowing that is all the way throughout, attention to detail, and characters that are really meaningful and develop in a way that adult shows should sit up and take notice, because the current crop of crap, and I said I would swear, so I'll throw that one in there for you to bleep out.
I don't think that counts as a swear word. I don't believe that one.
The current crop of that we watch sometimes it just pales by comparison what was done here, which would arguably be dismissed by many adults as a kids show, and it really is just so much more than that.
Yeah, and I would completely agree. It's everything I want from a Spider-Man adaptation. I know a few people that were turned off. They wouldn't watch it because they thought the animation was crap from the trailers they saw. And I think the animation's quite unconventional in the sense that, it's obviously it doesn't try to resemble reality in any way. But, and I didn't like the animation style at first, but it had grown on me by the end of the first episode. When I could see what they were capable of doing in terms of movement and the way that the characters express themselves as well. Everything comes through clearly, and it allows them to do some really interesting stuff with the action. So the animation, I don't have an issue with it. And anybody that has previously dismissed it because of the animation, go back and just deal with it. You'll get used to it. And even if you don't, something else about the show might suck you in.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely agree.
Yeah, more of this, and I'm sad to see it gone, and it's gone and it's not coming back, and we'll have infinite number of other Spider-Man cartoons. And I remember saying that nothing would beat the 90s show in terms of quality, and I do love the 90s show, and if it wasn't for the 90s version, this probably wouldn't exist, because it was doing intelligent storytelling about Spider-Man, and it's an extension of that in some ways, but so it's not fair to say this is good and the 90s show pales by comparison, because it is of its time, and this might be seen as of its time later on anyway. But every few years we'll get a new Spider-Man cartoon, I think, and I just hope there's another one that is as good as this one, because audiences deserve it, I think, to see something as good as this.
Aye.
We all do. And that's it, really. Yeah, it was great, and more of this. Thank you, Aaron, for joining me for the Spectacular Spider-Man retrospective. It's been great to chat through it. May it rest in peace. Well, there you have it. That was our conversation about Spectacular Spider-Man in its entirety. We both still miss the show and revisit it often, so if you've seen it before and liked it, just do yourself a favour and give it another look. You'll probably still love it as much as you did the last time. If you haven't seen it before and have listened to all of this, then you've been really badly spoiled, but give it a shot. You're probably going to like it, especially if you're a fan of the character. You're almost guaranteed to. If you like what you heard here, then please subscribe on iTunes, YouTube, or any major podcasting app, and join us on the next Kneel Before Pod.